what we mean by novelty detection and irregularity. So Eli is going to talk. Eli Nelken, who is another very important person at the ICNC, is the head of our teaching program and very good and old friend and collaborator. And we are talking about coding of surprise. Allow me to say in the brain, emphasis on the auditory system.
Okay, so I continue with the somewhat more bizarre talks that Merav started. Let me give you an introduction to the auditory system for the purpose of the machine learning person. Here it is. Okay, so we all know that we start at the ear, so this is a representation of the inner ear. Part of the inner ear is the cochlea, where we have something that is a little bit like a Fourier transform that's done on the sound. And then we have a lot and a lot and a lot of processing that goes in the brain, in many different parts of the brain, until we reach the cortex that Merav talked about. Now, there's a strong dichotomy here. If we look at the lower part of the auditory system, what people sometimes call low-level audition, we actually understand it pretty well. What happens there is the extraction of physical structure of sound. There are very good models for that, and we can actually account for some behavior extremely well simply by running computer programs that mimic the auditory system. So, for example, in a work that I did with Merav, we accounted for masking performance, the ability of people to hear words on the background of some type of noise. Okay, we could do it for essentially all words that we wanted using only 2 parameters, and that's very easy. If we look at the auditory cortex, words, music, all kinds of things like that, we actually encode completely different things. We encode the perceptual qualities of sound. We don't quite understand that. For example, we don't know how to do well automatic speech recognition, but we understand pretty well what's going on introspectively. So we don't have good direct conscious access to the low-level part of the auditory system, but we do perceive pretty well the middle. Now, since we saw the 2-legged cow earlier in the afternoon, I want to give you my auditory take on the 2-legged cow. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to play for you a bit of a sound. This bit of a sound is the bit of a sound that excites the basilar membrane, this Fourier transformer, at the location that corresponds to 2 kilohertz. Okay, so it's the bit of the leg of the cow, and you should tell me what the sound is. Okay, did you hear it? Okay, so what was the sound? Okay, here's another bit of the same sound. Okay, it's the same sound, except that what I'm playing to you is the bit that excites 600 Hertz.
Same sound as the other one?
Yeah, except that this is a 600 Hertz bit of it, okay? And here's another bit of it. I'm sorry, it's so weak.
Should be, what did it do?
Do you know which one was the microphone? No, that's not. No, what? You amplified me. Okay, so here's the full thing. Okay, so this is the full cow with the 4 legs. Okay, that's so I won't go through the explanation of what's going on, but what I want to emphasize is that we have, like in vision, or even more, in a way, even more strikingly than in vision, we have this problem of taking the physical structure of a sound, which is extremely well encoded in the lower part of the auditory system, and making it into the bits that are being processed by the cortex, the higher part of the auditory system. Now, the reason that we became interested in the issue of regularity, deviance detection, and so on, is because this is actually something that activates pretty well this mid part of the auditory system. Okay, so it's we were looking for strong effects, and this is a strong effect. So what do I mean by surprise? If it can't be louder, then this demonstration. Okay, so here's the archetypical examples of surprise in classical music. That's the problem. Okay.
With the microphone.
I guess.
Turn off the microphone, then...
No, it's a different amplifier. There are too many knobs here, but
There's some feedback there.
Okay, I mean, for those of you who didn't know, it starts very low, and then suddenly there's the orchestra gives a big chord, and the story is that Haydn was annoyed with people falling asleep during the slow movements of his symphony, so he made this in order to wake them up. But this is a pretty crude surprise. I mean, you didn't hear it, but I'm telling you that it was a large change in loudness, not, yeah. The interesting bits of surprise that we would like to be able to account for are things like that. So raise your hand when you hear the deviant sound. Okay. Never mind.
Try again.
Yeah. You can't. I mean, even I can't hear it from here. So. Okay. So the way that I'll show you some more complex ways of doing surprise in a moment, but most of the data, since we are recording from neurons, we wanted to start with a simple version of surprise. So what we do is the same paradigm that Merav does when she does mismatch negativity. Okay, did you hear the deviant sound? Okay. So this became, over the years, this experiment became the standard illustration of what mismatch negativity is. The 1000 Hertz tone evoked the black evoked potentials, and the deviant sound, the green one. And here the negativity goes up because these people plot the ERP, the evoked potentials with negative sign up for all kind of various reasons, but negativity is the mismatch negativity is the upward deflection here, as Merav showed you. So we want now to take this into the level of the single neurons. So now we record from using this paradigm from neurons, from single neurons. In fact, in order to have really a very good isolation of the neuron, knowing that I'm really recording from a single neuron, in the data I will show you here, the electrode is within the neuron itself. It's called intracellular recording. So what we see is the membrane potential of the neuron, what happens inside the neuron while it's functioning. I'm not showing you the output of the neuron, which are the action potentials, but just what happens within. So I have the sound that repeats many times, the tone that repeats itself many times, and it evokes some response. And here's the response to the deviant sound, okay, to the rare sound. And it's larger, so it's also a bit earlier. I should be very happy, except that, as Merav told you, neurons in the auditory system tend to be tuned. So it could be that the response to the red tone, which is in this case half an octave below the blue tone, it could be that it's larger simply because the neuron likes this frequency more than it likes that one. Okay, so I need to have additional controls. For example, I switch the role of the rare and common sound, so now the low frequency is the common sound and the high frequency is rare. When I do that, I get again two responses. The rare sound in this case evoke a response which is slightly larger than that of the common sound, but and then the other control that I have is that we commonly do is to play both of them with the same probability, and we get two responses which are again about the same as each other. The point is that now I can compare the response to the same sound, okay, to the same frequency when it is common, when it is rare, and when it is 50%. Okay, and now I can actually see the extra response that comes with the rarity of the sound. Okay, so this is one frequency, and here's the other frequency, and we can quantify these things in various ways.
So this is when you look at the single neuron.
This is within the single neuron, as single neuron as I can make it. Okay,
Even though different frequencies go to different neurons.
So they have. So the neurons have a tuning curve. In this case, the width of the tuning curve would be on the order of 1 octave. Okay, I don't remember exactly this specific neuron, but it's about 1 octave. Here, the frequency difference is half an octave. So it's narrower than tuning, but not by much. We can get down the frequency difference between the tone to 4%, which would be less than half tone. Half tone, C sharp on the piano is 6%. Okay, so the just noticeable difference for rats, which is done in rats, is about 6% or slightly less. And even if I shift the frequency by 4%, we'll get a little bit of difference, not large one, but a little bit. Now these are very single neurons, so what I'm showing you here is the local field potentials, which are our equivalent of the evoked responses of the ERPs, of the skull recorded responses that Merav showed you, and you can see the same effect with these two. Okay, the response is a negativity, and the deviant, the rare sound, has a response which is more negative than the response to the common sound, to the same sound when common. Okay, in this case, you have a decrease of about half the size. We quantify the things by the contrast. So we take deviant minus standard divided by their sum. It's the contrast between responses to deviant to standard. And if in these cases, it's about 1/3. 1/3 corresponds to a standard response which is half as large as the deviant response. And just to show you that this is interesting at least for this recording location, this is ERP, not local field potentials, not single neurons. What we did here was to map the frequency sensitivity of this signal. Okay, so we present a lot of different frequencies. These are the two frequencies that we tested against each other in the main experiment. And so we can ask what's the difference between the responses to the two frequencies when they appear in such a random mapping of frequencies. And the answer is that the contrast is smaller. So this is not a very strong comparison, but these neurons seem to be interested more by changes in the probability of the sound than by changing the frequency of the sound. Okay, so these effects are an important effect at the level at which we record the responses. Here is the statistics. So these are extracellular recorded spikes. These are the intracellular recorded membrane potentials. This adaptation index is presented here on a scale between -1 and 1. 0 means that the response to the rare and the common are the same. 1 means that there was a complete adaptation to the standard. Okay, there are two things to observe here. First of all, almost all cases, the index is positive, meaning that the response to a sound when rare is larger than the response to the sound when common. And secondly is that we have quite a lot of strong adaptation, okay, of numbers which are larger than 1/3 or 1/2. Okay, so that's the basic phenomenology. We know it now for a number of years. So here's the question: when the neuron responds more to the rare sound, what does it really respond to? And this is a bit of work that we did in collaboration with Tali. The person who actually did the work is Jonathan Rubin, who was a joint PhD student. And this is what we try to encapsulate, the idea that what we do is to look at the observed past, use it to make a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. Okay, and at the end, we'll try to compare the response of the neuron to a kind of a surprise given what actually happened, the mismatch between what we think should happen and what actually happened. Okay, so the nice thing about having people doing machine learning around is that this intuition can be actually put into numbers using the so the assumption is that the environment, that the source of the stimuli is a stationary process. That's not a problem. This is how we perform the experiment. Okay, with a given joint distribution of past and future, again, that's not a problem. This is how we design the experiment. And then we have a joint distribution of past and future because of the stationarity. And the thing is that what we assume is that there's an internal model that encapsulates information from the past and is being used to create the prediction for the future. So what we want is to define these internal probabilities and use them to define a surprise. All of this would depend on the internal model. Okay, so I'm going a bit in detail into what we mean by the internal model. So first of all, what is the model of the environment? This is easy. We specify the probability for the rare sound, and then given that probability, we select the tone independently, the Bernoulli sequence of tones, and then we can write immediately. That's basic statistics. Even I understand what's written here. What's the probability for the A and B for the common and rare sound to appear given a past? In this case, the past is defined as the last 5 tones in the sequence, and we assume a flat prior for the probability. Okay, and as we all know, okay, there's a sufficient statistic here, which is the number, let's say, the number of rare tones, actually the number of B tones that actually appeared within the last 5 tones. So here Jonathan calculated the information, the probability for the future tone given each one of the possible 32 past sequences, and it's clear that this probability depends only on the number of the B tones. So here's one notion of an internal model. Okay, the idea is that my past gives me 6 different values, possible values for the sufficient statistic. Okay, my brain, every time I observe this number, goes into one of 6 different states. Theory tells me what should be the probabilities I will assign now to the future event. Okay, and then given the state in which I am, I go and use these as my predictions for the next sound. And again, if the next sound will be either A or B, and if it's a sound that had a high probability, I will have small amount of surprise, and if it's a sound with a lot with small probability, I will be surprised a lot. Okay, now the point is that this may be a brain that's too complicated. Okay, my brain can have only 3 states. So here's an example of a 3-state brain. If I have 0 or 1 red tones, I go into state S0. 2 or 3 red tones, I go into state S1. And 4 or 5 red tones, I go into state S2. Once I have this specification, I can calculate again from theory what the probabilities of the future event should be, and I can do the same game. Okay, so this is another possible internal model. Okay, so these are the internal probabilities from which we will derive the surprises, but we need now to quantify the internal model because we have a lot of them. So we need to select among them, and here is again what Tali tells us to do is to use 2 quantifiers for the internal model. One of them is how well the model actually predicts the future, so this is the predictive power. This will be larger the smaller the amount of surprise that will happen. Okay, and obviously I want this to be large. So I'm using here the mutual information between the future and the internal state. And the other quantifier is the mutual information between the past and the internal state. The idea here being that this should be small. This should be small because there are many things in the past that are irrelevant for making the prediction of the future, and I want to get rid of them when I create the internal state. For example, there could be light in the room too, okay, turning on and off. But this is unrelated to the way that I selected my tone. So if I want to make the prediction about the tone, I should forget about the fact that there was a light going in and on and off in the room. So I want my ability to construct the past to be as small as possible without hurting my predictive power. This means that I forgot all the irrelevant parts of it.
Yes. Can I ask you to repeat one concept?
Yeah.
Are you saying that your perceptual capacity should be low? Limited means that the internal status should be defined in the small sector, or that so is that
I want the perceptual
status, internal status, or
I want the perceptual capacity to be as small as possible without hurting my predictive power. Okay, so I want to get it as low as possible. If when I get there, presumably, okay, what I did was to get rid of all the irrelevant parts for making the prediction, and then I have a good model for making the prediction. That's the idea. Okay, so what I want to do is maximum predictive power given perceptual capacity. And again, Tali and Jonathan have the magic of the information bottleneck algorithm, so they can actually calculate all of these models. Here's the result. So on the x-axis, I plot the perceptual capacity. The more I go in this direction, the better I remember the exact sufficient statistic. Okay, as I reduce perceptual capacity, it's as if I don't want to remember the full I want to simplify the sufficient statistic. Okay, this is the maximal predictive power that I can reach at each level of perceptual capacity. There's an information curve here. I can live below it, but I cannot be above it. Okay, now this is kind of a law of nature, if you wish. Okay, it's a small law of nature, but it is a law of nature. Okay, I can only be on this line or below, but not above. Okay, and here are the resulting internal models. Initially, as I reduce the perceptual capacity, what happened is that I start to be less precise. I don't remember exactly. Okay, so if I'm in state S2, I may have 1 or 3 bit tones in my past sequence instead of 2. Okay, but as I go on, I start to collapse, and I get to a 3-state brain, 2-state brain. If I don't put any resources into remembering the past, I can't do any useful prediction. Okay, and here's, for example, this suboptimal model that I described before. It's below the line. Okay, it's not on the.
Can you go back to the definition of the perceptual capacity?
The perceptual capacity is the mutual information between the past and the internal state. Okay, so it's just the mutual information of this matrix. Okay, as a joint distribution of past and state. Okay, that's.
Particularly the rate of information that you actually need to perceive in your senses and vision.
No, when you future and past are always only a single value, and the x hat is like 5 different values.
So the past is
no,
complicated.
the past is complicated. The past is for a 5 tones back past. I have 32 possible past. Okay, I know that I can, without losing information, I get to a 6-state past by taking the sufficient statistic, but here I want to get even less than that. Okay, even simpler past, and what we get here are optimal past given the amount of resources that I want to put into remembering it. Okay, so we can do the calculation for many different memory durations, going from 1 tone back to 50 tones back. And now I have a lot of internal models. Each one of them come with its own notion of the probability of the next tone in the sequence. So I can use the standard definition of surprise as minus log the probability of the event that actually happened. Now, this is a bit complicated here because I don't really know the internal state. I know only what the past was, not what the internal state of the brain. Okay, so there are a number of ways around it. One of them is just to use the average surprise I know for each pass, I know into which internal state it can go, and then I know the probability of the future state given this internal state, and I average. Okay, so that's one of the ways in which we went around the fact that we don't know the internal state. And now here's the crux of the matter. I have actual sequence of tones that I played to an animal while I was recording these responses. Okay, so I can look at these sequences. And for example, here I use a model that has 13 steps back and a perceptual capacity of 1 bit. So for each tone, I'm looking at the last 13 tones. I'm using it to get into an internal state, and then I know what's the surprise in the appearance of the next tone, or the actual next tone that occurred in the sequence. So these are actual surprise values that were estimated for tones that were played to, in this case, an anesthetized cat, from which we recorded neurons in its brain. And the next thing that I can do is to look at the responses of these neurons, okay? And then I can take these surprise values and these responses and plot them against each other. Okay, so that's the point to which I wanted to, that's the point that I wanted to reach. On the x-axis, I have surprise values calculated from this very formal analysis of the Bernoulli trials. Okay, on the y-axis, I have the actual responses of the tones. There's a nice linear relationship between them. And if you look at these are single trial responses. Okay, that's a response to each one of the tones separately. And if you look at the variability of these spike counts around the mean line, they are consistent with Poisson variability. The standard deviation here is about the square root of the expected value. Okay, so this is taken for us as a sign that we got to the actual biological variability. We don't want to go to predict better than that. Okay, that's the limit of the prediction that we would like to make. Okay, so here is an example of responses of a neuron to one tone that depends very nicely on the surprise. Okay, we can try to estimate the parameters of the model, of the best model out of that, to know what the duration of the memory and the complexity of the memory that is being reflected. This is not very easy because, as you see, the dependence of the correlation coefficient between the responses and the surprise, this is our fit criterion for fit. Okay, that this does not depend very strongly on the parameters of the model. Okay, so we know that we cannot go to models that are too short, and we know that we cannot go to models that are too simple, but we don't, among models that are long enough and complex enough, we don't have a way of selecting, which is yeah, they are okay, yeah, but what we can calculate is the significance of the correlation. So this is statistics over many neurons in cat auditory cortex. And here is a joint distribution of all the parameters of good models. Okay, so for each neuron, I take not only the model with the best correlation, but also all the models that have correlation that's above 95% of the best correlation, or 90% of the best correlation. And what we observe is that these models tend to have relatively long memory, 10 stimuli back or more. Okay, but they are relatively simple. They would have a memory capacity of between 1 and 2 bits. Okay, that's enough in order to account for the responses of the neurons. So the neurons remember a lot of past, but they remember it coarsely. That's the conclusion of this part of the talk. So immediately the question comes up of whether the neurons would be sensitive to actually more refined statistical regularities. And so we tried to do all kinds of simple manipulations on the oddball paradigm in order to test that. For example, this is the work of Amit Yaron in my lab. These are again intracellular recordings. Here what we did was to fix the probability of the deviant, okay, but to play it either in the context of a Bernoulli sequence of tones or a sequence of tones which is regular. So here the probability is 20% in this illustration of the deviant tone, and in the upper sequence, the deviant tone appears every fifth stimulus exactly. Okay, so we compare the responses to here in this case to standard in the fixed condition versus the random condition. Okay, except that the probability of the deviant is not 20% as in this illustration, but 5%. Okay, so we have 19 green tones and then a blue tone, 19 green tones and then a blue tone. Okay, now here I show you the response to the average response to the standard tone, to the tone to the frequency when standard. Again, these are intracellular recordings. So this is the polarization of the response of the sound. The response to the sound when in the fixed condition is substantially smaller than in the random condition. So actually the neuron knows the difference between the regular sequence and the Bernoulli sequence. In a way, it knows how to count at least up to 20. This is a much finer regularity than the one that than just estimating the probability of the sound. Okay, here's statistics. So each point here is one neuron. Okay, response to the random in the random condition versus response to the fixed condition. Here are the response to the sound when standard, and here to the sound when deviant. Okay, you see the shift, the general shift of the responses towards larger responses to random, and the points that are colored are points in which the difference was significant for the individual case. And finally, when we do this, we can also look at the response to standard and deviant as a function of their position within the sequence after the last deviant. And the important thing here is that these are one possibility was that what we see is effects that are linked to the appearance of a deviant. Okay, that's why the responses are different on average. But in fact, we see this difference in response very late within the 20 presentation of the 19 presentation of the standard. So somehow it looks as if the brain is in a different state. Okay, now that's one thing. The other thing that Amit did was to take the standard and rove it a bit. We took that out of, we actually followed Merav. Merav ran this experiment and got the result that she showed you at the end of her talk. So we did the same thing with the rest. It's very easy to us. So we have the random case and the roved case in which we destroyed a bit the regularity of the standard, and the prediction should be that the response to the standard should not be affected by this manipulation, but the response to the deviant should decrease. Okay, and this is exactly what happened. So this is taken from the work. The idea is taken from the work of Luba Daichen and Merav Afisar, and this is what we see. I don't show you the response to the standard; they are the same, but here you see again the response to the deviance in the random condition versus the roved condition. And again, there's a lot of units in which we have a larger response in the random relative to the roved. And I take just these cases that have the largest responses. Here you see the average responses. So in some cases, the neuron doesn't care about the question of whether the sequence is the standard is roved or not. And these are the response to the deviants. But in other cases, there's a very large difference. This is the response with the fixed standard, and this is the response with the roved standard. Okay, and we have quite a lot of these cases in which the response to the fixed standard is much larger than the response to the roved standard. Okay, now the last kind of effect that I wanted to show you is that up to now I had only pure tones. I want to show you that this works also with noise. Okay, so what I do is to take 2 tokens of white noise. I will try. There are actually 2 different sounds here. Did you hear the fact that there were 2? Some of you did, some of you didn't. There are actually 50%. Yeah. Okay, so these are really small differences. And again, we can look at the responses of neurons to sound. In this case, we compare the response to standard and deviant. So to the same sound, when it is the common sound in the sequence, that's in blue, and when it's the rare sound in the sequence, when it is red. Okay, this is a neuron. These are the 2 sounds that were played against each other. Okay, and this neuron doesn't care at all about the question of whether the sound is common or rare, but this one does. Okay, and here's another one that does respond differently to the same noise when it's common and when rare. And here's again the statistics. So the response to the sound when deviant tend to be larger than when it is standard. Okay, so how does this happen? This is not. We know that it's not activity-dependent fatigue of the type that Merav suggested, because it's on a single neuron. Okay, so if it would fatigue to one sound, it should fatigue also to the other. Okay, we know that it's not convergent of many narrowly tuned inputs that go on this neuron, and that we adapt one of them and the other one is not adapted. This requires some more arguments. Here we have a paper that just came out that demonstrates that. Okay, and we know that it's not reflection of things that happens below the auditory cortex, because there is SFA subcortically, but the main input source to the A1, to primary auditory cortex, where we record, actually doesn't have stimulus-specific adaptation. We think part of that has to do with so-called neuromodulation. These are all kind of materials that are being poured out in the brain and that signal the significance of a stimulus. And in particular, we think about acetylcholine that has a tendency to inform the brain about the behavioral importance of something. So if something is rare, it's important simply because it's rare. Okay, we don't know exactly what this is something that we study actively. And all of that, does it work with real sounds? So we started to play music to our rats. Okay, the specific bits of music that we used here is it's a piece called Musica Ricercata of number 2 of Georgi Ligeti. It was used by, well, you will not hear it. Okay. The point is that it's very simple, okay? It has only 3 notes. It has E sharp, F sharp, and G. Okay, they appear in octaves, so it's not really 3 notes. It's a little bit more, but it's not much more. Okay, and the way that it's built, maybe. Where is it? Oh, I just closed it. Okay, never mind. The way that doesn't matter. Tali doesn't matter. I'll play it. Those who are really interested can come in the break. Okay, the way that it is constructed, there are 2 E sharp and F sharp, which are being played for a big part of the beginning of the piece, and then the G come up at.
In the beginning, when you played things, we could hear them before you plugged in the audio. Maybe we should just listen to it without the magnifier.
Just from the computer, maybe.
Yes, we can hear it.
Take out the line.
I took out. Okay. Do you hear it? So these are the E sharp, F sharp. This is Tom Cruise walking in the streets of New York at night. Okay, this is Eyes Wide Shut of Stanley Kubrick. Probably rival distributions in here also. Okay, now this is the G. So now the two things appear together, the main theme and the G. And so on and so forth. So it repeats itself. So that's the thing that this is what's represented here. Okay, so this is MIDI notation, and this is just a spectrogram calculated in MATLAB. Now, to be very short, here are the results. On the beginning results that we have. These are the actual sound levels of each one of the tones that appear in the piece of music. So that's the initial presentation of the theme. Here it repeats itself in pianissimo. Here it repeats itself again in pianissimo. These are the Gs, okay? And here this E sharp, F sharp theme and the G appear together, okay? And then it goes back, and there's another G here at the end. Okay, these are neuronal responses just summed up, many neurons in rat auditory cortex. So this is an anesthetized rat. Okay, the poor guy never heard the piece until after it got anesthetized and recorded from its brain. And the main thing is here. Okay, these responses are responses to the Gs. Okay, only when the G appears we have a significant response here in this part of the piece, and that's also a response to the Gs that appear here at the end. The interesting part about it, we needed to do a lot more controls here. Okay, that's only the beginning of the work. The interesting part is that the size of the response is almost uncorrelated with the sound level. Okay, so here we have a measure of how loud the sound was, and here we have a measure of how strong the response was. Okay, and these large responses are responses that come from the G. Okay, these are large responses all over the place in terms of sound levels. Okay, so at least in this very coarse experiment at the moment, we'll make it finer by playing more by doing the correct controls. It looks like this type of surprise actually occurs and is functional in anesthetized rats relative to what we would call almost real-world signals. Okay, I don't want to summarize in great length. Okay, this is for biologists. This is has its own set of important points. For you, I don't know. I hope you will find something interesting here. Thank you.
What was the response to the G independent of the context?
We didn't test it. I mean, that's part of the control that we have to make. But the neurons seem to be tuned to the whole range of frequencies that appear in the piece. So if you would play just at least the harmonic of the G, the relevant harmonic of the G, they should respond to it and to the F sharp and to the E sharp in the same way. They are very close to each other. Okay, there's no reason why the G should float up above the responses to the other tones.
So the assumption that the rat actually captured the structure of the piece?
Yeah.
Even the large scale structure?
With that, we don't know.
So there's a hierarchy there.
Yeah.
It is consistent with the fact that the piece itself is discovered a difference between randomly appearing and constantly appearing every 1 out of 20. If you stretch out to 20, how long can you get?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big questions. We don't know. Okay, the rate of presentation that we use here is 3 tones per second. Okay, so the 20 seconds represents something like 20 tones represents something like 6-7 seconds. Now, we know that the basic effect, the difference between standard and deviant, is present even if we play the sound 2 seconds apart. Okay, so in principle, we could do it. The problem is that these experiments start to take huge amount of time. We have limited amount of time that we can record from any location in the brain, so we cannot do all the possible manipulations at each place. But that, of course, I mean, that's one of the things we should say. Okay.
All right. I'll actually mention some of the things that appeared in Ellie's talk in the context of video tomorrow morning for those of you who wake up early enough.